It's the Blue White Breakdown, Tuesday edition. There was a little Monday holiday action. It is January 20th. Bob Flounders here with Max Ruff. It's a Blue White Breakdown Penn State podcast, but people, there's gonna be a little weather talk because this is out of control. Max is in State College, and it's even colder up there than it is in Harrisburg. But no matter where you are, I think in Pennsylvania or anywhere near Pennsylvania, it's just bad news bears. Like it's just, and it's going to get worse. So we have that to look forward to, Max Roth. But the national championship game was completed Monday night. A Big Ten team has won it for the third consecutive year. Kurt Signetti's Hoosiers, who Penn State saw this year. But we have
Mhm.
a lot to get to here, Max. I want to talk a little bit about a transfer portal wrap. I want to look at maybe what we liked in Penn State's class, but also take a look at who James Franklin got with him to go to Virginia Tech. I think that's important. I think we can talk about some players maybe that Penn State could really miss that have left. And also the ESPN's annual way too early top 25 is out. Spoiler alert, we're talking about it. Penn State made the list, but it's quite a list. So Max, how are you? Sorry about your Bears. I know that probably was a tough one, a tough loss, but life moves on. They had their chances and they just couldn't pull it together.
Yeah, I mean, the Bears hurt,
Yep.
especially considering it was a game that
Yeah.
they had more than enough chances to win. But they overachieved this season, and
Yeah.
they've got a quarterback and they've got a head coach. And if you got those two things, you could probably stick around for a while. So I'm at least pleased with a lot. It was an exciting year. Can't complain. The
Yep.
weather, absolutely correct, sucks hard right now. Um, like it feels like -3. I was out,
Yeah.
had a little scrum with basketball coach Mike Rhodes earlier today that I stopped by, and it was brutal. I did not want to be outside very long. And I will say though, it's going to get worse, but I think Penn State fans, if you have your eyes on the outdoor hockey game that's happening at Beaver Stadium this month, be grateful that it is not this Saturday and it is
Yeah.
following Saturday. Because right now we're looking at a high of like 11 degrees this coming Saturday. I
Yeah.
don't know what it's going to be next week for the actual game, but knock on wood, I'm not sure it's going to be worse than that. So, to be glad that if you're going to that, it's not this weekend. Weather sucks, but I'm feeling good, Bob. I had a nice 3-day weekend, and yeah, like I said, the Bears hurt a little bit, but fun season, so can't complain too much.
Yeah, I think I'm going up. There's a wrestling match on Friday, and it's Friday
Mm.
night, and I'm looking at the weather for that, and I might bring some PennLivers and some former PennLivers up for like a little bit of a caravan to see Cale Sanderson's incredible wrestling team, who probably on Friday night in Iowa City in the history of collegiate wrestling, I'm not sure there's ever been a more impressive performance by a team against a legendary program. They absolutely uh, took Iowa to the woodshed, and they
Yeah,
almost shut them out. And that's never supposed to happen. I think
yeah.
they shut out Northwestern on Sunday, but yeah, they're wrestling Friday night, and the real feel I think at night is going to be like close to zero, but it's
Mhm.
probably going to be even colder than that. But I'm going to stop moaning because people don't want to hear about it because they're freezing too. Max, let's get to the Indiana Miami game. Heck of a game.
Yeah.
I give Miami a lot of credit, Max, for hanging in there. Um, both teams physically demanding game. Mendoza got punished. The Indiana defense was great. A couple of swings there, but I think you and I saw what Indiana's passing game and running game could do up at State College with the chips on the line when they registered a really impressive win over a Penn State team that probably played their best, final 20 minutes of regulation of the season and almost beat them.
Mhm.
But they did it again last night against a really good defense. That was a fun game to watch,
It
and
was.
it was a very physical game.
It was, and I mean, we're the nth people to say it, but my goodness, Kurt Signetti, like, take a bow. I mean, that was the worst program in the history of Power Four, Power Five college football, and he won a national championship in 2 seasons. It's just like he said it would be a hell of a movie, and it really would be, and I'm guessing it's gonna be, but before
Yeah.
long, because like it's hard to it's hard to really fathom just how impressive that accomplishment is, and if you're going to spin it to a Penn State perspective, or at least for the relevance of our podcast, like it's proof of concept that you get the right coach in there. It doesn't take a lot of years to rebuild a program, and Penn State doesn't need a whole lot of rebuilding. I mean, it had a talented team last year that underachieved, but had good moments down the stretch. And before that, winning 9, 10, 11 games every year. And so it's a good sign that if you've got the right coach, if you got the right support in the program, you can do a lot of things. You need the quarterback. Indiana had it. I think Mendoza is a better quarterback than Carson Beck, but even Carson Beck had good moments down that stretch that got
Yeah.
Miami to the national championship. You got to have the right quarterback, you got to have the right coach, and you got to have an administration that's willing to go out and get the right pieces in the transfer portal. And both of those teams in that championship game are examples of that. I mean, they supplemented high school recruiting with the portal in a big way. And that's the model right now with the way things are going. That's the model. You can use them as the example. But just so unbelievably impressive. A great game. You talk about some of the like plays down the stretch. I mean, the Mendoza run for the touchdown on 4th and 5, just incredible toughness. Charlie Becker making a few unbelievable catches. Malachi Tony, a true freshman for Miami, like doing some really good. I mean, the kid is fast. They're good teams. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. Fun game, and a really just a great moment for college football because it's so special
Yeah.
and unique in how it came down.
Great defensive play, a huge special teams play, I believe. Also, just the back shoulder plays that they kind of feasted on all year came to light again in that game. And also, I'll just remember that it was a really good. So Signetti and what those guys do with the adjustments they make, running the ball on 3rd and long a couple of times, and it was absolutely the right call for first downs. All of that kind of stands out. But Max, you talked about proof of concept. As you look at the playoff and where it's headed and where it might be going, whether it's going to be bigger, and it almost certainly will, just getting out of the Big Ten, we're talking about what Indiana has done, is going to be, it's just going to be hard because it's such a deep conference, such a competitive conference. You talk about the teams at the top. It's really, it's Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon. And I wanted to bring this up with you because you talked about Penn State. ESPN's way too early. Top 25. I have a couple notes. I want to run it by you real quick. Once I find my notes, I will do that actually. But I believe there are 8 teams. I believe 8 teams are made the ranking, and that's it's impressive. It's Indiana's 1, way too early. Oregon 5, Ohio State 6, USC is 13. Here's the one that surprised me. Iowa is 16,
Mm.
Michigan 18, Wisconsin, I think. No, not Wisconsin. Washington 19. Penn State checks in at 22. So I believe that's 8 teams, if my math's correct, that it is. But that just kind of, Max, speaks to just how challenging it's going to be. Uh, it's there are easier paths to get to the college playoff than what awaits Penn State in the Big Ten. I'm not sure. Maybe I don't. I'm not with what they're doing in the transfer portal. I think it really speaks more to what they think of Matt Campbell and his staff almost as much as what Penn State is doing, because they're losing an awful lot of good players. I know they added some good players, but does it surprise you they cracked the top 25 given how wacky of a year it has been for Penn State?
I'll be honest, not really, because I just think that the name carries so much weight, and it has for a long time. I mean, you can think back to there were a couple years under James Franklin where Penn State didn't have as good a team as as most of the years in his tenure, but there were definitely years where they were not as good, and they hung around in the rankings a lot longer than they probably should have. Penn State's name carries weight. There's an SEC bias, I think, for sure, from ESPN and their coverage crew of college football. But like the Big Ten gets some preferential treatment as well, and a brand as historic and noteworthy as Penn State also does. And like, yes, there's part of that, but when you're looking way too early, I think it is a projection of the
Yeah,
fact that Penn State has a manageable schedule and they brought in a lot of good players. And it's not just the Iowa State players, it's all the
right.
guys they retained from
Sure.
Penn State. When you look at the floor of talent, I absolutely believe that this team is a preseason top 25 candidate. Um, I'm not that surprised. I think it's good news that people are excited and expect good things from the Matt Campbell era at Penn State. I think the fact that Penn State is because they also landed in like CBS Sports and On Three also did top 25s and Penn State's in those as well. The fact that
Hmm.
they landed in like the 15 to 25 range, I think makes sense. They're not going to be a top 10 program right off rip next year, and they shouldn't be. But I think top 25 is absolutely reasonable. I mean, Iowa State was a top 25 team multiple times under Campbell, and the blend of talent that he's got right now looks like it has a pretty high floor. And so I think when you're projecting out that far, the fact that it's Penn State's brand and the fact that Matt Campbell's done a pretty good job, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, and the comments about the outlook, they close. I think Mark Schlabach, I believe, is the guy who wrote the piece. I hope I pronounced um, his last name right, but he did the piece, and they do close with something that's fairly obvious and in relation to Penn State's schedule. And you've talked about it, Johnny's talked about it, you guys have both talked about it. No Indiana, Ohio State, or Oregon next season for
Yeah.
Penn State. So that's a big, I think, a pretty big component as well. And I also think Max. I believe last year, I think they might have been one on the way to, and they were there one or two in this story last year after what they did, and that's even more crazy to think about. That's how 2025's offseason started with them, and you think about where they were in the middle of October. So a crazy ride, and now it is Matt's team, and
Yep.
we talked about where they are. Max, when you think it's also the transfer portal, uh, see you never, man. Like that was I could do without the transfer portal, but I know it was an extreme year just based on all that happened. But Max, when you think about it, um, what jumps out most to you maybe about either the players they lost, the players they brought in, maybe what other Big Ten teams did? It was just a crazy, crazy portal season. How James Franklin kind of approached it with former Penn State players. Like what if we're talking about the portal, what are two or three things you know right off the top that really stand out to you when you talk about Penn State?
Yeah. Well, I will say just to start as a reminder, like guys who are already in can still commit.
Yeah,
Like
I
Penn
know.
State could still be
I
out
know.
there, but
I know.
obviously the departures are now done. And there are also the teams who played in the national championship could still see
Right.
guys enter, but so it's not quite done, Bob. But we're right there. We're right there. We're on the doorstep. Yeah, unbelievable. I think the number one thing that stands out to me, and this is built out of necessity because of the firing, the coaching change, and everything. But you put up a great story that I hope a lot of our readers and listeners saw is that Penn State in this offseason, bringing in 39 transfers, brought in more in one offseason than James Franklin did in his entire career in the transfer portal era, which started in 2018. And like I said, it was built out of necessity
Right.
because a lot of guys wanted to follow James Franklin. They had a ton of seniors on the roster as well. You didn't have time to recruit in high school, but it's still just kind of like unfathomable how much movement there was. And also, I mean, it is a reflection on the fact that James Franklin was very portal averse in his career. I mean, I don't think he ever brought in a double digit class. And I mean, we just talked about how the model is Miami and Indiana playing in that national championship game, and those guys are going out and spending money on transfers. That's how you got to do it. I think Matt Campbell aced it in his first offseason of trying to play catch up and build a solid roster with a high floor, and he did so with guys he knew and also
Yeah.
guys who were here at this place before. And that's number 2. You said one or two things for me that stood out. Number 2 is even more so than the Iowa State guys he brought over are the guys that he kept at Penn State, because that took some commitment. That took recruiting, that took investment because they didn't know those guys firsthand, and it does go back to Terry Smith holding over with this staff and Pat Kraft and Matt Campbell making sure that he was happy here. There are a lot of things that go into that, both from, building a relationship to financials, all of it to keep a Darius Dixon, an Andrew Rappelier, a Kobe
Mhm.
Howard.
Mhm.
You go down the list. There are a lot of players who produced as young guys on this team last year that have really bright futures. And I think there's as much talent sticking around for the 26 team that was on the 25 team as there is that he's bringing in. And he's bringing in some good players, but this team's ceiling is much higher because of what he did in roster retention. And I just think that was so impressive. And it's not to take away from some of the guys that he picked up in the portal because
Yeah.
there are good players. And especially a lot of the Iowa State guys he brought with are good football players. But I just think the work that went into retaining those guys from last year's team is just what sticks out to me so much because you don't see that. You don't see that everywhere. And that was really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I still have a smile on my face, even though stuff still could happen in the transfer portal. I think that a lot of it is in the rearview mirror, and I'm not thankful for this weather on January 20th, but I'm thankful for it closed
Yeah,
late last week. So
yeah,
I'm very thankful for that, Max. I just wanted to say, he and as everything you said is right. They did not. I think there were a couple players that I wish they could have kept that it just didn't work out. I wanted to get to two things with you. Players, I think that Penn State wanted to keep and they couldn't keep, and they're probably going to miss them. But also, just a quick look. Let's start with just a quick look at who James Franklin uh, got from Penn State to go play for him um, at Virginia Tech. I'll read the names. At first I think it was 12 in all, or it's either 12 or 11, but I'm just going to go through them real quick. Offensive lineman Michael Troutman, wideout Tyseer Denmark. Oh, I always get this guy's name wrong. I think is it Malachi Williams or Malachi Williams? Max.
Malachi. Yep,
Malachi Williams, defensive end. Cortez Harris, edge rusher, defensive end. Kenny Wosley, the nickel player in the defense, the 50B. Randy Adarica, young defensive lineman. Young tight end Matt Henderson. Another young player, Daniel Jennings, at defensive end. Quarterback Luke Reynolds. Quarterback Ethan Gruntmeyer. Tight end Luke Reynolds. I think Luke did play quarterback though
he
at
did.
one point
He
when
did.
he's a prep. Maybe that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Quarterback Ethan Gruntmeyer, tight end Luke Reynolds, wideout Jeff Exener, and linebacker Keon Wiley. I believe that's the list. I just checked it recently. Max, just your thoughts on what James did and who he was able to get to come with him to Blacksburg.
Yeah, I think one thing I'll add is there are a lot of high school commits who
Yeah,
who followed him from
sure.
Penn State's class, and
Yep,
I think the big one there is Messiah Mickens, a Harrisburg kid who really stood out at running back, played defense too, just a great
yep,
athlete. That one hurts, but as far as guys who we've seen at college, and that's always high school can be a guessing game. So we'll focus on the transfers. Luke Reynolds is a guy who had some struggles this year, dropped a few passes. He still needs some work as a blocker, but
yeah,
the athleticism at that position is so hard to find. He really has the makings of being a star, whether it's in college or it's an NFL team gets their hands on him and molds him. He's a really good athlete. He could be a great tight end. He's gonna hurt, and we've talked ad nauseum about Ethan Grunkemeyer.
yeah,
I think he's a good player. I think he's
yeah,
got a great future, but the situation just didn't fit at Penn State when they wanted Rocco Becht and he wanted to start. And outside of those two, I don't know,
yeah,
Bob. I'm not that moved by the group that James took with him. It was a lot of young guys who we didn't see, which makes sense. I think Johnny McGonigal made the point on a podcast last week or 2 weeks ago. These are guys who didn't see the field and just made their decision to play somewhere 12 to 24 months ago and have that relationship with James Franklin. And when they haven't had a chance to prove anything else, anything otherwise, why not go with the guy who trusts you? And that makes sense, but there just aren't a lot of guys that you say, wow, that sucks that Penn State couldn't keep them around and James stole them. And I have to assume that's a pretty disappointing outcome for James Franklin. I would have to imagine that he wanted to bring a few more talented guys with him that he recruited and couldn't do it. Of that group, I think we keep talking about him and he's never made the impact, but we feel like it's there. Is Tysier Denmark at wide receiver, because I do still think Penn State's floor is much higher in its receiving core next season, but I still think Tysier has a high ceiling. And Randy Adarica, defensive tackle, who didn't get a lot of buzz during the season, but I think we heard some good things about him, Big Randy, and I think he could be a nice player. But everyone else is just so much of an unknown. I think James took guys he was comfortable with. I think they were comfortable with him. But all in all, Penn State kind of dominated James in the portal this offseason. And Matt Campbell, if you're going to make it a 1-to-1 comparison, Matt Campbell won in this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. I would love to have seen, and I'm sure he probably had one because James is a big list guy. I would love
Yeah,
to have seen his Penn State list of guys he really wanted or thought he
yeah,
could get to come to Virginia Tech. And I'm sure he'll say he got everyone he wanted and he's really happy, but you
yeah,
don't always get everyone you want. And you look at some of the players that stayed at Penn State, number one, and you look at some of the players that went to a school like Tennessee, number two,
yep,
and I think there's some common ground there. And I think what I think about the Penn State guys that did go to Virginia Tech, I think you have it right. I think Penn State fans who follow the program closely, they're going to be very curious to see how Grunkmeyer's career develops there. Also, I think another guy I think that Penn State fans are going to follow very closely is the Tasmanian Devil at Tennessee, a
yeah,
guy that I think everybody wanted. Not a finished product by any means, but an incredible athlete who just needs to add some weight, get some experience. He was one of three really good defensive players that went from Penn State to Tennessee to play for Jim Knowles and Anthony Poindexter. Actually, four. I should say
yep,
four, not three.
4,
I keep
yep,
forgetting about Lane, the safety, who's another really good player that I think Penn State probably wanted to keep. So when I think about the transfer portal, I think about who James got and didn't get, and I also think about the players that I think Penn State will definitely definitely miss, and I think quite a few of them are going to be Tennessee Volunteers.
yeah. No, I'm with you. I think it's so interesting because we talked so much and there was so much turmoil, like even inside the building, about Jim Knowles and his defense this season. And yet 4 of Penn State's top
Yeah.
10 to probably top 10 returning guys next year, 4 of them go to play with Jim Knowles at
Mhm.
Tennessee. And obviously, I mean, they have the familiarity, so it's different, but it's just kind of funny that we had so much consternation over Knowles and his scheme and the way he taught it, and it ends up that some of the best guys still want to play
Mhm.
for him. There are other factors, but Amari Campbell hurts. You and I were both such big fans of his. Thought he was a fantastic player, a great
Yep.
leader, on and off the field. Impressive kid. I think Dejon Lane's a good player who took a step back this year in Knowles' scheme, which
Yeah.
kind of makes it interesting to me that he followed him. Poindexter is there as well, so that's something you got to consider because the guys who play for Anthony Poindexter love him. But I didn't think that Jim Knowles' scheme necessarily maximized what Dejon Lane could be. But those guys, I agree. Those guys are who you're going to miss. There are a couple of offensive linemen who went down to Florida to follow
Yeah,
Phil Trautwein.
I think
Yeah,
Boyer is a guy just based upon it was only one game, and
yep,
Clemson had a lot of opt outs on the defensive line. But for him to step in a big spot in the Pinstripe Bowl after the starting tackles kind of made a decision to sit it out. Drew Shelton being the left tackle that Egan Boyer replaced. That to me, that was one of the more impressive things I saw by a young player during the entirety of the 2025 season. And I think that performance really, I'm sure Egan Boyer probably had a couple other teams that might have wanted him too because he had a very solid performance. So I'm not saying he dominated, but He did not look uncomfortable. He looked like he was ready. Did they give him help at times? Yes, but there were also times he didn't need help. I think he's a very underrated guy that I think Penn State probably would want back. And I would just say Amari Campbell, the one thing I remember about him is he said very early on, before the losing troubles surfaced, that he said that Jim Knowles' defense wasn't that different
Mhm.
from Bill Belichick's defense at
Yeah.
North Carolina that he learned because he was there throughout the spring, and I think that actually helped him. And he picked
Mhm.
it. He was the one guy that picked it up pretty quick. They could tell that Jim trusted him right away. So I guess why wouldn't he go? Why wouldn't he not go to there rather than have to learn yet probably another defense? Right? Again, he could just kind of hit the ground running, and I think he's a great addition for Tennessee. He's a guy that they're definitely going to miss. But and I just wanted to say Xavier Gilliam, I think for what
Mhm.
he can do, he's not flashy, but I think there were a lot of big schools that really wanted him too.
There were, yeah, some you talk about like a Notre Dame or I think a Texas A&M was in on him maybe.
Indiana was in on him too, I believe.
Indiana as well, yeah, and apparently if Indiana's in on you, it's good news these days.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, to your point about Amari, he wasn't the only guy that we heard too that said Jim Knowles' scheme was a pro style. I remember King Mack talking a lot about that. So if you find the right fit, like Jim Knowles still I would venture to almost say legendary defensive coordinator. I mean, he won a national championship. That for it's he's got the goods for the guys who can run it, but obviously it didn't work out at Penn State this year. Yeah, Egan Boyer, that's a guy who's such a fascinating story because when he came in, I think he weighed 220 pounds.
he's
And
almost lanky. Yeah, he's like six
yeah,
eight. Right.
yeah, now he's like 300 pounds and was able to hold his own in the Pinstripe Bowl.
Yeah.
Always a favorite of Phil Troutwine's, as well as TJ Shanahan, who's down there.
Yeah.
I think it all just goes back to the point of like there are players that Penn State will miss, guys who could have contributed to next year's team, whether it be a Boyer, Amari Campbell, any of those guys at Tennessee for sure, Luke Reynolds, Ethan Grunkemeyer. But in the totality of it all, like Penn State's team is not much worse off because they don't have those guys. Like Matt Campbell got pretty much all the guys who you
Yeah.
said like they have to be on this team next year in order to reach your goals, and he did it. And that's just that should not be overlooked. I don't think it is overlooked by any fans out there, but I really want to hammer that home because it's such a big deal how he was able to do that.
That's how you stay. That's how you get in the way too early uh, top 25 rankings that are all out nationally. We talked about the ESPN one. Penn State was, I think, 22 on that one of 8 Big Ten teams. The schedule is going to help them for sure, but life just is not easy in the Big Ten, and it's only going to get, I think, tougher as some of these other teams get straightened out. Teams like Michigan, USC. I'm still fascinated that Iowa made this list, only because they actually lose that quarterback that was built like a defensive tackle, and they're starting over there again. And whenever I think about Iowa, I just think about, well, how can they score enough points to be taken seriously by anyone? So yeah, but it's been a very interesting start to 2026 with the transfer portal, another Big Ten team. Um, you know, winning the national championship, and they're not going anywhere. But yeah, fascinating year, fascinating weather. Kale Sanderson's killing it on the wrestling front. Max is going to have some basketball coverage, some ice hockey coverage. They're really good as well. I believe Max and Johnny will be back for a podcast a little bit later this week. But yeah, Max's power is out at State College. It's just going to be one of those weeks, but at least we don't have to worry about the transfer portal as much anymore. Max reminds me that yeah, stuff can still happen, but I think for Penn State, the dishes are done when it comes to the transfer portal. We're going to wrap this one up. We'll have some more podcasts, I think, later this week and early next week. I hope everyone is staying warm. I am not very warm right now, and I think the temperature's dropping. It's already dropped a couple of degrees since this podcast started. So I'm going to end it right now. Great chatting with you guys, and Max and Johnny will be back later in the week.